Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's How I Would Write Lost, Part 7, Season 6B. So this video is part of a series of videos where I give my version of how I would do a reboot of Lost if I somehow happen to be the master creator in charge in this very fictional scenario. And this is part 7 of my series. So, you should not watch this video unless you have seen all my earlier videos, because this really builds off of what I've done before, so you'll be quite confused, even if you've seen the show Lost, because I've changed things so much to this point. If you watch this video without the prior context of seeing all my previous videos. Also, you should have seen all of Lost up to the very end of the show, because although my version is quite different, some things are similar, so it would spoil some things for you if you haven't seen Lost up to the very end of the show. So, this video will cover the last 6 episodes of my version of Season 6. So, as I mentioned before, every one of my seasons of Lost has 13 episodes. And for Season 6, since I'm changing things so much, I decided to split it into 2 videos. So, the first video, Season 6A, covered my first 7 episodes of my version of Season 6. And this next video, Season 6B, will cover the last 6 episodes. Although, and also to clarify again, that I'm not saying that the season would be aired in halves like this. I just split it up this way just because the videos would be too long if I didn't. If it aired, it would all air at once. But anyway, so I'm not going to bother with any preamble. As I said, you should have seen the previous video where I cover the first 7 episodes of Season 6 to know what's going on, because I'm just going to jump right into it. But before I get into before I get into Episode 8, I am going to start with a recap of the list of characters I have and where the locations are at, just to sort of reorientate yourself. Cool, so at Hydra Island, or the Hydra Island group, we got Jack, Sun, Jen, Alana, Lapidus, Widmore, Zoe, Desmond, and all of Widmore's men. And the Man in Black's camp, we have the Man in Black, Sawyer, Saeed, Ben, Caesar, Richard Alpert, Mr. Echo, Hemi, the Freighter Folk, and all the others that joined, and the 316 survivors that joined. At the Arrow Station, we have Kate, Claire, Hurley, Miles, and Pierre Chang. And back at the barracks, we got Walt, Daniel Faraday, Charlotte, Shannon, Steve, Tracy, Rose, Bernard, Cindy, the kids, Zach and Emma, I believe they're called, a couple of the extra 815ers who survived, and a couple of the Freighter Folk who survived. Cool. So now we're going to jump into my episode 8, which is called Negotiations. This is a Richard Alpert flashback. So, the island storyline. The episode begins with Miles, Pierre, Kate, Claire, and Hurley arriving at the Arrow, and Pierre Chang going straight to the hidden room, which reveals a dusty old command center type room. Chang and Miles make short work to get it operational again, and Chang brings up a map of the island that can detect energy readings or life readings. Chang points to a bizarre-looking blob and says that that's the anomaly. When Kate and Hurley seem confused, he clarifies that it's what they've been referring to as the monster. He also detects a large group of people in close proximity to it, and so clarifies it's their target. As he prepares to launch the missiles, Kate asks that if the Man in Black can't be killed by missiles, what's the point of launching missiles at him? And Chang answers that although he can't be killed, the humans following him can be killed, and they are just as dangerous. We then go to the Man in Black's camp, where we see Ben talking to Saeed, where Ben seems to be questioning his decision to follow the Man in Black, whereas Saeed seems sure of himself. So Ben asks how he can be okay with betraying his friends, but Saeed answers that they were never friends. They were just people with a common cause to leave the island, and so when these same people brought him back to the island against his will and no longer wanted to leave, they were no longer have the same common cause. Therefore, he's just going to ally himself with whoever does, but it's obvious Ben doesn't buy this. But then the Man in Black and Caesar return, and they start addressing the group about how Widmore is building a force on Hydra Island to strike against them, and they have to attack this force in order to leave the island. But then the Man in Black starts freaking out and yelling at everyone to run for cover. They're all confused at first until they hear the sounds of missiles firing in the air. So most people run and hide. Those who don't are killed by the first missile. Then another missile strikes and kills even more people, and then the third. After the dust settles, the Man in Black finds his forces has been cut in half, with all the main characters surviving, of course, but the Man in Black is pissed. And he aggressively shouts that now it's time to fight back. We then go over to Miles, Pierre, Kate, Claire, and Hurley walking through the jungle, where they explain they launched all the missiles remaining and are aware they didn't kill them all, but hope they did enough damage to the Man in Black's forces. When they were at the arrow, they noted by the screen with heat signatures that no one was at the temple, but a sizable group was at the barracks, so hoping that's their people, they decided to go there. Once there, they meet up with Faraday, Charlotte, and everyone else, who tells them what happened at the temple and that Jack and Alana and a small group slipped out before it happened. Miles and Pierre elect to stay in the barracks with everyone else until this blows over, but Kate, Claire, and Hurley elect to go off searching for Jack and the others. So they part ways. The survivor of the Man in Black's camp meet up with at a new spot with the men who had captured Richard Alpert and Mr. Echo. Caesar questions them about the recent bombing, but they claim ignorance, which Caesar doesn't believe at first, but the Man in Black does and convinces Caesar of it, claiming that it was Jacob. When Caesar tries to argue that Jacob's dead, the Man in Black simply says he has minions everywhere. The Man in Black then addresses Richard Alpert and Mr. Echo directly, trying to convince them to join his cause, but Alpert refuses, saying that he knows who he is, and Mr. Echo says that he has no desire to leave the island, so the Man in Black orders them to be tied to a tree. Later, Ben goes over to Alpert to give him and Echo water, and Alpert grills Ben on why he's with the Man in Black, and Ben simply says Alana was going to kill him, so he has no other choice. Alpert brings up the fact that they knew each other for a long time and asks that if he trusts him and tells him to let him go, but Ben is too scared and refuses. Later, we see 3 survivors from Flight 316 who are freaked out by the missile attack try to leave. As they say, they just want to leave the island. They don't want a part of any of these murders. They didn't sign up for war. They're not mercenaries. And Caesar tries to calmly and politely talk them out of it, and when he can't, he just kills them. He then tells the other survivors to let that be a warning to them, as they're in a war and they won't tolerate desertion. Alpert then tries to talk sense into Sawyer after what he just witnessed, but he's not biting either, saying he doesn't care about anyone else, he just wants to leave the island. Some of Caesar's men then return with Kate, Claire, and Hurley bound and gagged. Sawyer gets upset as this is the first time he's seen Kate in 3 years, and the Man in Black tries to convince them to join his cause, but they all refuse, so he then looks at Claire and says that this is one of Jacob's minions, that she may in fact be the one responsible for the earlier missile attacks, so he orders Caesar to take her to a secret location. Kate freaks out over this and charges at the Man in Black even though she's still bound. Some of the goons hold her back, but the Man in Black tries to console her and assure her that it's okay, that they all want the same thing. He removes her gag so she can speak, but she just spits on him, so he headbutts her, which knocks her out. Sawyer then charges right up to the Man in Black and gets in his face, threatening him, but the Man in Black only calmly suggests to Sawyer that he back up immediately, and reluctantly Sawyer does. The Man in Black then has Kate and Hurley tied up alongside Echo and Alpert. Later we see Sawyer trying to console Kate and tell her how great it is to see her again, but she just angrily asks what he's doing with the Man in Black, and he just says he wants to leave the island. He then tells Alpert that he's in and will help them escape, and Alpert just says not yet. Later we see Alpert talking to Ben, and they have a heart-to-heart where Alpert says he understands why he was upset with Jacob, and he let himself be manipulated by the Man in Black, that he doesn't need to continue to be manipulated. Ben eventually breaks down crying, saying that it's his lust for power that got Alex killed, and Alpert suggests that he's letting his lust for power get to him again because the Man in Black had offered Ben the island after he left. And he tells him to rise above it. Ben argues that no one else will have him, but Alpert says that he will, and that he'll protect him against Alana. So Ben agrees, and they prepare to escape. Hurley asks about Saeed, but Ben tells them to forget about it as he's fully devoted to the Man in Black. So at night, while the Man in Black is away, Sawyer and Ben make their move and they free the 4 prisoners and escape into the jungle. So this is basically Ben's redemption arc. So the flashbacks in this episode, we begin shortly after where the flashbacks in Ab Aeterno left off, where Richard still has long hair and goes by Ricardo, where he meets up with Jacob, who tells him that he's bringing more men to the island, and it will be his job to guide them without interference. They are standing on the beach looking at the sea to where Alpert detects a 18th century large passenger transport ship flying the American flag approaching. Jacob tells Alpert he's going to have to give them time to adjust to their situation before approaching them. We then cut to a scene where a man in his 20s is sitting by a stream drinking water from it. Richard Alpert calmly approaches him with his arms raised and greets him warmly by name, as his name is Jeremiah. Alpert talks about how he emerged as how Jeremiah had emerged as the leader of the camp, and it's because he understands the island is special. Jeremiah says he understood that when his hands were healed, as he describes being in an accident that lost him the use of his hands as they shook all the time, and he was no longer able to hold things or operate machinery to work. But here he was the fierce hunter that he always knew that he could be. Alpert explains that the island helped him too, and that his job is to protect it, and that he wants to help Jeremiah convince his group to devote themselves to protecting the island as well. Jeremiah tells him that the others aren't ready to hear this yet, and they're still hoping to be rescued, but he's sure they'll eventually learn their place is here. He then asks Alpert who he is, if he's the protector of the island, but Alpert shakes his head, saying that he only works for him and that his name is Jacob. Jeremiah asks Richard what his name is, and he replies Ricardo, and Jeremiah smiles and says, "I'm going to call you Richard." We then flash to the 1920s, where we see Jeremiah sitting on a hilltop cliff that overlooks a large bustling camp when Richard Alpert approaches. Jeremiah is now in his 70s, and Richard Alpert now speaks perfect English with an American accent. Jeremiah greets him by calling him Richard. Richard sits next to him and notes that he was the only one who called him Richard, but now he's gotten used to it and he thinks he'll adopt the new name. Jeremiah gestures to the bustling camp below and muses about how far they've come. They managed to build a strong community out of a scattering of lost souls. Richard then asks Jeremiah about a man named Leonard who came in search of the first officer of the Black Rock, Mr. Whitfield. Jeremiah grunts and says that Leonard is Whitfield's grandson, although he doesn't go by Whitfield anymore. He changed his name to Widmore. He says that he's settled in and become truly devoted to the island, and he's even fallen in love with one of the women there and is going to settle down with her. Jeremiah then notes that he still idealizes his dead grandfather. Richard muses that the man was a monster who casually killed a bunch of harmless people, but Jeremiah notes that Leonard Widmore will never accept that, but it's okay, he doesn't have to. Jeremiah then muses about how amazing it is that Richard looks exactly the same as when they first met, and that his time on Earth isn't going to be for much longer. He then tells Richard that Widmore was a man of tremendous money that he's now willing to devote to their cause, as well as he still has a functional boat. So he urges Richard to use the money to start a front out in the real world so they can recruit more people to their cause and have a foothold on the outside world should they need it. Jeremiah then tells him of a research company he created called Middle East Bioscience, and that Richard needs to oversee its creation as a tool to recruit people to the island. Richard promises to get it done. We then jump to the 1980s when Ben is a young man wearing a Dharma jumpsuit and Richard calls him into his tent. Richard is dire and tells Ben that Jacob just gave an order that might be difficult for him. When Ben asks what it is, Richard reveals that the entire Dharma initiative must be wiped out, including his father. Ben says that he's completely okay with it and that in fact he's been waiting for this day. Richard is surprised by his reaction and tells him to consider this carefully, that no matter what he did to him in the past, he's still his father, and this will be his last moments that he'll ever get to spend with him. But Ben is very distant and says that he's spent enough time with him already. So Richard then asks if they can count on him to play his part in the execution of this plan, and with conviction Ben says, absolutely. We then cut to a scene where Ben's older and he's reading at nighttime. He's reading a nighttime story to Alex, who's about 4 or 5 years old, as he puts her to bed. Richard lurks just outside the open door waiting for Ben, but does not disturb them. Ben notices him and stops the story, kisses her on the forehead, and puts her to bed. Then he goes to talk to Richard. Richard tells Ben that Widmore has been squandering all their money in business ventures that they set up in the outside world, specifically to recruit new people to the island, and instead he's using it for his own personal interests, as he sees those enterprises as belonging to him rather than the island, because it was his father who established them. So Richard says that it's time Ben took over as the leader of their group, as Ben was always willing to put the interests of the island above his own. Ben asks if this is coming from Jacob, but Richard says that Jacob doesn't tend to involve himself in internal matters like these, and this is coming from Richard. So Ben accepts. We then later flash to 2004, shortly after 815 crashed on the island, where Richard knocks on the door to Ben's office, and Ben gives him permission to enter and asks what he wants. Richard asks him if he's sure he's doing the right thing with the survivors of the plane crash, that terrorizing them may not be the best way to win their devotion to the island, but Ben denies that he's terrorizing them, simply conducting recon. Opera then brings up the abductions and the brainwashing, and Ben simply tells Richard that it's not like him to question how he conducts himself, that Jacob tends to want to not interfere. Richard says that this is true, but it's his job to make sure the people on the island are not corrupted by other temptations. But Ben gives a heartfelt speech reassuring him that he's just as devoted to the well-being of the island as he's ever been, but Richard doesn't seem convinced, but he leaves his office. So the point of the flashbacks being how Richard oversaw the people on the island to try to keep them devoted and away from the influence of the Man in Black. But as we saw in season 4, Ben has already been corrupted by the Man in Black, but Richard isn't aware of it, but suspects that something is up. And of course the point being that Ben let his lust for power corrupt him to follow the Man in Black, which leads into the island storyline where Richard shows Ben that his lust for power has been his downfall and Ben redeems himself. Alright, cool. So now we'll get into my episode 9, which is called Chosen. It is a Walt flashback. So the island storyline, the episode opens in a living room in New Otherton, where Daniel Faraday, Charlotte Miles, Pierre Chang, Rose Bernard, Shannon, and Steve are talking about what to do next. Shannon is concerned something happened to Mr. Echo as he's been missing for too long, so she suggests going out to look for him, but Pierre Chang cautions against it, saying that it's not safe out there. But Shannon asks if anyone is safe here, and Rose suggests that once Walt wakes up, they will be, as he's the only one protection they have against the smoke monster. So Shannon asks if they should just sit there and wait and hope the situation resolves itself, and Pierre Chang says that it's exactly what they should do, that they need to let the candidates defeat the Man in Black. But then a huge sonic shockwave goes off and everything is strange and bizarre as it looks like the air itself is vibrating with a loud thundering sound. Everyone leaves the house to investigate, and Faraday notices the sensation gets worse the closer they get to the house Walt is in. So he, Charlotte, Miles, and Steve run over to the house. There they find Tracy, who was looking after Walt, cowering in the corner, holding her head in pain. Steve goes to help her while the other three make their way to Walt's room, where they find him convulsion. Charlotte shakes him to wake him up, and he does as his eyes suddenly open and he yells, and just then the strange phenomenon stops, and Miles asks what the hell was that. Walt, who is perfectly calm and awake now, calmly says that he knows what to do. We then see him sitting in the living room talking to Daniel, Miles, Charlotte, and Steve while Tracy brings them some water. Walt says he had a vision of a place on the island that he needs to go to a hidden cavern no one else knows about. Tracy says that he's in no condition to go anywhere, but Walt says that he's fine now, that the island healed him, and Tracy confirms that he's recovered a lot quicker and more complete than what should be possible. Miles asks if the best thing to do is to wander off into the jungle with some weird kid who should be dead. Faraday then reminds him of what they just witnessed and says that he's inclined to believe this weird kid and tells Walt that he's going with him, and Charlotte says determined that if he goes then she's going as well. Miles and Steve still think it's a bad idea, but they don't care, and shortly after the three of them set off on their journey. While walking, Charlotte asks Faraday why he's willing to trust in visions now as he's a man of science, but Faraday explains that it's his scientific opinion that the island is special, and Walt has proven to somehow be a part of that, so he's willing to trust Walt to see where it goes. Walt then leads them to a hidden cavern where the three of them have to dig and remove rocks to uncover the entrance. Eventually they go inside to discover a vast cavern of ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics and writings on the wall. Charlotte is amazed and immediately starts reading and studying them. Faraday asks her if she can read this language, and she says essentially yes. That's a very strange dialect, but it's essentially comprised of several ancient languages that she's familiar with. Meanwhile, Walt finds a large circular artifact and seems fascinated by it, and at one stage just sits there in almost a meditative state. Later, Charlotte approaches Faraday and Walt and tells them that she's deciphered that the more prominent writings describe a very special place on the island, which roughly translates to the heart of the universe. Walt suddenly opens his eyes and says, "That's it. It's the heart of the island, the source of all life and love in the world, and that if it goes out, then the world will end." Faraday asks Charlotte if she thinks this is what Chang was warning about, and she says that it's possible. He then asks Walt if he knows where it is, and he says that he does. Walt then goes over to a wall with ancient Egyptian writing and asks Charlotte to translate it for him, saying he somehow knows this one wall is important. Charlotte reads them and says it tells the story of a great ancient Egyptian who magically came to the island in order to protect the source of good in the world. It also says that their descendants will inherit the ability to fend off evil. Walt then says with clarity that it's him, that he's descendant from these Egyptians that lived on the island. Faraday asks how he could know such a thing, but Walt says that he just does. He then grabs Faraday by the shoulders and says that it's imperative they protect the heart of the island right now, or they're all dead. So back at the Man in Black's camp, we see him send Saeed on a mission to Hydra Island. He says he spotted that Woodmore had a secret weapon, and he wants Saeed to go to Hydra Island and capture the weapon for him and bring it back. Saeed asks what the weapon is, and the Man in Black answers that it's Desmond. We see Mr. Echo, Richard Alpert, Sawyer, Kate, and Hurley camped out for the night, where they're all asleep except Hurley, who sees a vision of Jacob. And Jacob tells Hurley they need to go to Hydra Island as it's where Jack and the other candidates are and they need their help. In the morning, Hurley tells the others this, but Sawyer doesn't believe him, but Richard Alpert does, and with Kate's help they convince Sawyer to go with them, and Richard leads them to a boat where they can go to Hydra Island. We get a few scenes with Jack and Woodmore as Woodmore prepares his men for a fight, warning that the Man in Black is coming for them. Alana gets her weapons ready and tells Sun, Jen, and Jack to stay out of sight, that she'll protect them, but it's important above anything else that they survive. We then get a scene of Saeed stealthily sneaking on the island and taking out Woodmore's men that are guarding Desmond, and then he abducts Desmond and takes him away. So, flashbacks for this episode. We follow Walt in high school 3 years after he returned to New York City, where he seems to be settling into his new life. He meets a girl named Emily, who just moved to the area and is very friendly with her, and they start a relationship. Later, we see Walt at home, where his grandmother is trying to tell him that he needs to decide what he wants to do with his life, and is pressuring him to go to college. He goes along with it, but she can tell that he's just humoring her, and she tries to impress on him how important it is that he's successful in this world. Later, we see Walt and Emily on a date having fun. When the topic of what to do after high school comes up, Walt tells Emily about being pressured, and Emily agrees that she doesn't like it when her parents pressure her like that. Walt says that it feels like he's been living someone else's life. She asks what he means by this, but he tells her just to forget about it. Later, we see him sleeping at home having a bad dream where Locke, Charlie, and several others who died are yelling at him, blaming him for their deaths. He wakes up in a panic, screaming, only to find several birds have crashed into his window and died. His grandmother comes in to comfort him, but after he's calm, she starts to walk away like nothing happened. Walt gets upset and asks her if they're ever going to talk about this and why this happens to him, or whatever happened to his father and why he disappeared. She shakes her head and says that it's not important, that the only thing that he needs to think about is going to college and getting a decent career. Walt gets upset and yells at her, saying that it's obvious he's not normal, that something's wrong with him, and he tells her to just stop pretending. She tries to convince him that it's fine, that he can be normal and just forget about these incidents, but he gets upset, puts on his clothes, packs a few things, and leaves. Later, we see Emily meet up with him in a diner, and she asks him what's so important she had to meet him at this late hour. He asks her to run away with him and just leave and go anywhere. She says that's crazy, but then he tells her about the island and how 815 crashed there, and he was on board, and the official account was a lie. She doesn't believe him at first, but he convinces her. He then tells her about his special powers, and she doesn't believe him, so he makes a fork fly into his hand without touching it. She's shocked, but says that running away isn't the answer, and tells him that she's going back home and will see him in school. She tells him that maybe he should focus on college. He shrugs his shoulders and says, "I guess so." And then she leaves, but you can tell Walt isn't convinced by this, and he says quietly to himself that he never should have left the island. So next we get to my episode 10, which is The Conflict. It is a Widmore-centric episode. So Island storyline, Kate Sawyer, Hurley, Richard Alpert, Mr. Echo, and Ben row to shore on Hydro Island on an outrigger boat and are met by a group of Widmore's men pointing guns at them and shouting to put their hands in the air. Sawyer tries yelling back at them, but it doesn't work, so they all throw down their weapons and put their hands behind their heads. Until Jack comes running out of the jungle and yells at Widmore's men, asking them what the hell they are doing. Widmore comes out and reinforces Jack's statements, telling them that it's okay, they can put their guns down. Widmore apologizes to Sawyer and the others, saying that his men are a bit jumpy after Desmond was abducted from them right under their noses. Kate runs up and hugs Jack, telling him that she's glad he's okay, and he returns the sentiment. Sun and Jen then come running out of the jungle, and Hurley runs and hugs Jen. Jack then greets Sawyer, saying it's good to see him again. He then asks Kate what happened to Claire and Miles. She answers that Miles stayed at the barracks with the rest of their people, that they're safe because Walt is there. Sun then asks if Walt's okay. Kate says when they left him, he was on his way to recovery. Jack then asks about Claire. Kate gets more serious and says that he has him. She then implores them to go on a search and rescue mission to find her, but Widmore butts in and tells them that none of them are going anywhere, that the Man in Black and Caesar are coming there to kill them all, and if they find them, he'll pick them off one at a time. Kate says that she thought the Man in Black couldn't kill any of the candidates. Widmore says not directly, but he has a bunch of men and they can kill the candidates. And the only thing Widmore has to protect against the Man in Black's army is his army. However, his men can be killed by the Man in Black, and so he points to electric fences, saying that's why they need to stay here, that his men can protect them against Caesar's army, and the fences can protect his men against the Man in Black. Alana then walks up to them, cocks her gun, and says that she's there to protect them all and that she won't let anything happen to them. We then get a scene, a series of character interactions as everyone prepares for the big battle. We get a scene with Kate and Jack reuniting, which starts off sweet with Kate possibly inferring she still loves him, but then the topic of leaving the island comes up and Jack is totally devoted to staying and following his destiny, and Kate thinks he's crazy, so the conversation ends badly. We also get a scene of Hurley chatting with Sun and Jen, where Hurley tells Jen about his daughter and how he was there for her birth and tries to reassure them that everything will be fine. We also get a scene with Mr. Echo confronting Alana for the first time about the concept of the candidates, and he asks her who is going to be chosen to replace Jacob, and she says that it's not for her to decide. She also tells him that he needs to stay inside the compound during the fight. More important, which at first he refuses, saying that he wants to be on the front line, but she convinces him it's more important that he survive, and he relinquishes. We also get a scene where Widmore and Richard Alpert talk about Ben, where Widmore wants to arrest Ben and put him under guard, but Alpert tries to convince him not to, that they need Ben now. Widmore brings up how Alpert sided with Ben against him before, but Alpert tells him to realize that he didn't have the island's best interests at heart back then, and Widmore has to admit that he's right. So Widmore agrees to leave Ben alone. We get another scene where Sawyer and Kate go to Lapidus, who's trying to fix the plane, saying that no matter what happens, they won't let anyone destroy the plane, and they're using it to get the hell out of here. However, Lapidus does say there's nowhere to get the plane ready. There's no way that he will be able to get the plane ready before Caesar's forces get there. We then get this epic battle as Caesar and the Man in Black's forces arrive at Hydra Island at night to face zero resistance, as no one is around, so the smoke monster charges in to the island but is stopped by a sonic fence. So Caesar's forces move to attack the fence emitters, but when they do, hidden explosives go off, killing a bunch of them. So they charge in and fire at the emitters from a distance. Widmore's men suddenly appear and start shooting at them. So a battle ensues, and when Caesar's men take out some of the emitters, the smoke monster moves forward, killing Widmore's men that are nearby. However, there's another layer of sonic fences behind that, and they can't detect the source, so Caesar's men span out looking for the source in order to kill the candidates. We get several battle scenes, including Alana being a badass and killing several of Caesar's men, Caesar himself advancing, killing many of Widmore's men. Lorenzo and a few of his men make it far and advance on Hurley and Sun, but Jen and Mr. Echo appear to fight them off, where Jen gets wounded, but then only Mr. Echo and Lorenzo remain, and they engage in an epic fight where Mr. Echo eventually wins and kills Lorenzo. We then get a scene where many of Caesar's men, more reluctant followers, are cornered by Jack, who convinces them to switch sides, and he assures them that he'll protect them against Caesar, so they switch sides. We also see Kate, Sawyer, and Lapidus fight off people who are trying to confiscate or attack the plane. We see Caesar approach the power source of Hydra Island to try to disable the power so the smoke monster can attack, but Alana is there waiting for them, and they have an epic fight, but Caesar eventually wins and kills Alana, but in the process he gets himself injured. And just when it seems he's going to disable the power source, Widmore appears and shoots Caesar, and gloats as Caesar is about to die, but Caesar reveals a hidden gun and shoots Widmore. And as they both slowly die, Caesar gloats that Widmore doesn't get to win either. So, with Caesar and Lorenzo dead and all of Caesar's men either dead or switched sides, the battle is over. However, Widmore and Alana are dead, and most of Widmore's men are dead, with only Zoe and 4 other people surviving. Jack and the candidates walk out to the edge of the sonic fence where the Man in Black is waiting for them. He gloats that he still has Desmond and Claire, and that he might just focus on using Desmond to destroy the island, and he dares Jack to try and stop him. And then he leaves Hydra Island to head back to the main island. Cool, so then we'll get into the flashbacks of the episode. So the flashbacks begin with the nightmare Widmore is having. We see flashes of his time on the island, Ben kicking him off the island, and then the island on fire, burning, people dying, and the island collapsing in on itself, and the smoke monster appears, ripping people limb from limb, and then changes to the man in black form and very spookily says, "Thanks, Widmore, for helping me win." We then see Widmore jump up in bed, and he reaches for his bottle of scotch that he has by his bed and drinks it, and then he notices a figure in the dark standing by his bed. "Is that you again, Linus?" he asks, but the man steps out of the shadows, and it's Jacob. Widmore doesn't recognize him and asks who he is, but Jacob only replies that he knows who he is, and somehow Widmore does, and he said that after all these years he spent on the island, he had never appeared to him, he only talked to him through Richard, so why now, after all these years, did he finally decide to visit him? And Jacob replies that because Widmore strayed from the path of protecting the island, and the island is now in the most danger it's ever been in, and it needs his help. Jacob adds that Widmore knows that he strayed from the path, and Jacob is offering the chance for him to make things right. Next scene we see Matthew Abaddon introducing himself to Widmore as he comes under his employ, and Widmore clarifies that he was sent by Jacob. When he asks what he does for Jacob, he answers that he helps people get to where they need to be. Widmore says he knows where he needs to be on the island to help Jacob protect it, but Abaddon answers eventually, but not yet. At the moment, there are forces off-island that threaten it. When Widmore asks what he means, Abaddon throws down a picture of Caesar, saying that this man has been making inquiries to the Dharma Initiative assets that he had required, and to Middle-earth bioscience, and anything having anything to do with the island. Widmore says he's heard of him, that he's a self-made billionaire. Abaddon says that he somehow knows about the island and wants to exploit it for his own personal gain, and he's willing to destroy it in order to do so. That's when Jacob said that the island is facing the greatest danger it ever has. He meant that Caesar was a part of that. So we then see Widmore meeting with Caesar in a business meeting where Caesar is offering to buy all of his Dharma Initiative properties. Widmore has no intention of doing so, but stretches out the meeting to try to glean more information on what Caesar is up to. Caesar catches on to the tactic and then flat out tells him he thinks that Widmore staged the wreckage of Flight 815 in order to hide something powerful. Widmore denies it and accuses him of believing in absurd conspiracy theories, but Caesar is unmoved and acts with confidence and says that whatever he's hiding, he won't be able to hide from him for very long, and then he leaves with a smug look on his face. Later, Abaddon meets with Widmore to tell him that there were hidden parts of the Dharma Initiative Widmore didn't know about, and now Caesar controls them, and he's going to use them to get to the island. Widmore says that he'll do whatever is required to stop him, and Abaddon questions his sincerity on that, asking him if he'll be willing to give his life for the island. Widmore says that he is, but Abaddon says, "We'll see." And then he tells Widmore if he wants to help Jacob, he needs to protect the candidates. So next we get into my episode 11, which is called The Candidates, and it is a Man in Black flashback episode. So in the island storyline, we start in the aftermath of Hydra Island battle, where everyone is gathered together arguing what to do next. Kate is pleading with Jack to go rescue Claire, as that was the only reason Kate came to the island, but Sawyer warns that it's obviously a trap, that the Man in Black wants them to go looking for Claire, so he suggests they just focus on getting the plane operational again, and to just leave. But Kate argues that she's not leaving without Claire. Hurley then brings up Desmond and the fact that the Man in Black said he was going to use him to destroy the island, and what the hell was that all about? Zoe then speaks up and says that Desmond is a weapon and that he was this failsafe Widmore was going to use to protect the heart of the island from the Man in Black, but the Man in Black can use him to destroy the heart of the island, so it looks like he's going to do that instead of trying to kill the candidates. Mr. Echo then steps up and says that they need to stop him. Jack then makes a leader decision and tells people what's going to happen. He says that he and the other candidates are going to take the sub over to the main island to rescue Claire and Desmond, as the candidates can't be harmed by the Man in Black, while everyone else who isn't a candidate is going to stay behind and help Lapidus get the plane ready so that the Man in Black can't use it to leave the island. Richard Alpert is against the idea, as the candidates are important, and this plan puts them directly in harm's way, but Jack reassures him that they'll be fine, that there's nothing he can do to harm them. The candidates then prepare to leave. Mr. Echo says his goodbyes to Richard Alpert. Jack says his goodbyes to Ben, telling them that he heard what he did for Kate, and he trusts him and knows he trusts him now, and Ben says that he's going to do what he can to earn his trust. While Kate and Sawyer tell Lapidus to get the plane ready but not to leave without them, which he acknowledges by saying roger that. Back on the mainland, we see the Man in Black returning, and Saeed is there to greet him and asks how it went, and he answers it didn't go well and says that Caesar and all of his men are dead and the others are still preventing them from leaving the island, and that he needs Saeed's help to convince the others to change their minds so they can all leave together. He agrees to it, but you can tell from his reaction that Saeed is suspicious of the Man in Black. We get more interactions between Jack, Sawyer, Kate, Hurley's son, Jen, and Mr. Echo has their own their way in the sub to rescue Claire and Desmond. Mr. Echo warns Jack that the other candidates have yet to take their role as candidates seriously and are still thinking about leaving the island, and that he recognizes this from his time as leader of the 815 camp, as it took them years to want to stay on the island. Son and Kate catch up, and the son promises to help rescue Claire for her. Meanwhile, Sawyer and Jen talk about how it's like old times in the Dharma Initiative, and Sawyer asks for his help to make sure once they have Desmond and Claire that they leave the island, as Jack and Mr. Echo might try to stop them. But Jen says that he has his full support, that now that he has his wife again, nothing's going to stop him from returning from leaving the island with her and returning to their daughter. They arrive on the island to find Saeed waiting for them. They're a bit cautious of him at first, but he tells them that the Man in Black sent him there to convince them to let him leave, but he doesn't trust him and thinks he's lying, so he'll help them rescue Claire and Desmond as long as they promise to take him off the island afterwards. Jack tries to argue that they aren't meant to leave, but Sawyer interrupts him by saying he does promise to do so, so Saeed agrees to help. He leads them to the old 815 camp where he and the Man in Black are holding Claire and Desmond. There are several armed men guarding them, the ones that didn't go to Hydra Island. Jack, Saeed, Mr. Echo, Sawyer, and Kate go in firing while Son and Hurley keep lookout, and Jen stays with them to protect them. They go into the hut and find only Claire there. Kate rescues Claire while the others look for Desmond but can't find him. Finally, Saeed concludes that the Man in Black must have moved him. Jack warns that rescuing Claire was too easy, but Sawyer tells him that he's being paranoid. So they make their way back to the sub, but the Man in Black is there waiting for them on the pier as he begs them once again not to go and warns if they do, he'll simply destroy the island. Jack pushes him off the pier into the water, and they all go into the sub. Kate and Sawyer argues that they should take the sub and leave the island, but Jack and Mr. Echo argue that they can't just let the Man in Black destroy the island, and Hurley backs them up, adding that they can't just abandon Desmond. However, as Kate looks for a med kit to help treat Claire, she finds instead a bomb. Saeed tries to disarm the bomb, but says he's not sure, that they could try disconnecting these two wires, but he's not sure it will work. They yell at the sub driver to rise, but he says it will take 5 minutes to reach the surface, where the bomb ticker shows less than 3 minutes. Sawyer goes to pull the wires, but Jack warns him not to, saying that this was the Man in Black's plan all along, to get them in a confined space where they couldn't get out of and let them kill themselves. He says that the Man in Black can't hurt them, so as long as they leave the bomb alone, nothing will happen. Nothing's going to go off. But Sawyer thinks that's nonsense. Jack tells Sawyer to trust him, but he says, "I'm sorry, I don't," and he pulls the wire and the timer just starts ticking faster. Saeed grabs the bomb and tells Jack that there are 3 possible places the Man in Black might be holding Desmond. Jack asks why he's telling him this, and Saeed says because it's going to be you. He then takes the bomb and runs to the other end of the sub, where it explodes, killing him and damaging the sub, and it starts taking on water. However, several people are injured in the explosion, including Claire, who gets hit in the head, and Sun, who gets pinned to the wall by several heavy pieces of equipment. Jen, Sawyer, and Mr. Echo immediately work to try to pry her free, while Jack tells Kate to take Claire to safety, and he tells Hurley to go with them. He then works to help free Sun as the sub continues to sink, but another explosion happens that shakes the sub, and a piece of equipment falls on Sawyer, injuring him. Jack tells Mr. Echo to take Sawyer to the surface, so he does, and then he tries with Jen to free Sun, but eventually Jen tells Jack to go. He doesn't want to, but Jen pleads with him to do so, so he does, but then Sun tries to convince Jen to leave as well, saying that he'll die too if he doesn't go now. But Jen says that he'll never leave her again, but Sun tells him not to be a selfish bastard, that they still have a daughter that's out there, and she needs him to raise her, so he kisses her deeply and reluctantly leaves. We then see Jack wash up on shore, where Hurley, Kate, Claire, and Mr. Echo and Sawyer are waiting for them. Kate asks about son Jen, and Jack shakes his head, but then Jen washes on shore crying and screaming, and the others start crying with him. We then get an ominous scene of the Man in Black on shore looking out at the wreckage, where he says, 2 down, 6 to go, and then the episode ends. So the flashbacks. The flashbacks are a truncated version of Across the Sea, but only from the Man in Black's perspective. It's a more succinct version fit into flashback form, and we don't get any scenes that are only from Jacob's perspective. Like, we don't see Mother making him protector of the island. We start off the episode with the Man in Black and Jacob as young boys and follow up through there. However, when the Man in Black meets his real dead mother, we get flashbacks to Mother finding her and killing her, and that it's implied that the Man in Black is seeing this. And then we follow him as he leaves Mother and lives with the men, builds the donkey wheel, gets attacked by Mother, and then he kills her. Then Jacob throws him in a light and he becomes a smoke monster, and then that's where the flashbacks end. Cool, so then we move over to my episode 12, which is What They Died For, and it is a Jacob flashback episode. So we see the survivors of the sub explosion, Jack, Kate, Hurley, Jen, Claire, and Mr. Echo silently walking through the jungle. Jen is still crying, and the rest are really somber. Jack finds an ideal camping spot and tells them they should camp for the night and figure out what to do in the morning. No one argues with them, and they make camp. Claire goes to Jack and tells him it's important that they defeat the Man in Black. Jack asks her how they do that, and she says that she doesn't know, but she does know it needs to happen. Kate goes to Jen and offers her condolences. He doesn't respond at first, but then Kate talks about how much she cared for Son and how badly she wants revenge on the Man in Black for killing her. That's when Jen perks up and says that he promised Son he'd leave the island and raise their daughter, and that's what he intends to do, but not before killing the Man in Black, as he specifies that he will have his revenge. Sawyer goes to Jack and asks if he did this, if it was his fault for killing Saeed and son, that he never should have pulled the wires, but Jack reassures him that it's not his fault, that it was the man in black who did this, and it's him that they'll need to get back for it at it. The next day, we get a scene with the man in black entering the barracks. Everyone freaks out and calls for Walt, and when we see Walt, he holds up his hands and says he comes in peace. Walt looks like he's prepared to attack him, but doesn't, as the man in black repeats that he just wants to talk. So he asks Pierre Chang directly where the heart of the island is, and Chang asks why he should tell him. The man in black answers that because he'll eventually kill all of them if he doesn't, but Chang retorts that if his intention is obviously to do something to the heart of the island. By doing so, he'll end up killing everyone, so that's not a real motivation. The man in black asks if he really believes that, but they say nothing. Walt then speaks up and tells him where the heart of the island is. Everyone is shocked, but the man in black just smiles and says thank you and leaves. Now, you may be asking, why does the man in black need Walt to tell him where the heart of the island is? Because he's been there before as a kid, and also when he turned into a smoke monster, but that was centuries ago, and he turned into a different being since then, so he doesn't really recall. Anyway, after he's gone, everyone asks why Walt would do that, and Walt cryptically answers that it's because it's what needs to happen in order to end this. Tracy asks him why he doesn't just kill the man in black, but Walt answers that he can't kill him, he can only hurt him temporarily, and doing so at this time would have been pointless. He then says that he has a journey to make, and he asks Faraday and Charlotte to come with him, and they agree. Bernard and Shannon start freaking out, asking that if Walt leaves, there'll be no one there to protect them against the smoke monster, but Walt reassures them that the man in black will be too busy dealing with other things, so they'll be safe. Miles and Steve promise to stay behind and protect the rest of them. After all the candidates wake up, they start arguing amongst themselves what to do next. Sawyer still wants to return to Hydra Island to leave the island, while Kate and Jen simply want to find the man in black and kill him, but Jack warns they don't know how to kill him yet, and they need to find Desmond as he's the key to all this, and Claire concurs. Meanwhile, Hurley is off by himself having a pee, and once he's done, the young boy version of Jacob appears and steals his ashes and runs off. Hurley chases after him to find an adult Jacob sitting by a fire who tells Hurley that the ashes are in the fire, and when it goes out, he'll be gone for good and never come back, and he tells them to get the other candidates and says that it's time. So Hurley gathers everyone up, and Jacob sits them by the fire and explains that he brought them all there to protect the island. When Sawyer tries to protest that they were doing just fine before he interfered with their lives, Jacob retorts that they weren't, and he didn't pluck any of them out of happy lives, and they needed the island and they needed each other to heal. Mr. Echo speaks up and says that it's absolutely true that before he came here, he was a lost, angry man, and now he's truly found himself. Jacob then says that he's going to give them something that he didn't have, a choice, and they have to decide who the new protector of the island will be. Jack stands up and says that it's meant to be him, that he's meant to do this. Jacob asks if that's a question, and Jack says no, and Jacob says good. So then they walk over to the heart of the island. On the way, Jacob tells Claire that she doesn't have to be in his service anymore, that she should return to be with her son, and tells her that she'll be a very important figure in his life and that he needs her. She tries to argue that she doesn't know how to be a mother, but he tells her that she'll figure it out. When they arrive at the heart of the island, Jack and Jacob go there and learn where Jacob asks if he has something to drink out of, and Jack has a water bottle, so Jacob fills it with water from the stream and tells him to drink. Once he does, Jacob says, "Now you're like me." After Jack returns and reports that Jacob is now gone, the others ask what they should do, and Jack says they should head back to the beach camp. Nobody questions him, they just do it, and once they arrive, they find Ben there waiting for them with a boat. He says that he came to see if they needed any help, and Jack claps him on the back in a gesture of friendship and says they absolutely do. So Jack tells them they need to sail to the Dharma Initiative Pier, and no one asks why, they just do it, and once they're there, they find Walt, Faraday, and Charlotte waiting for them there. They come on board, and once on board, Jack asks Walt where to find Desmond, but Walt answers that it doesn't matter because the man in black is taking Desmond to the heart of the island, so that's where they need to go. Sawyer throws up his hands and exclaims that they're going right back to where they came from, and that's just a big waste of time, but Jack replies that it wasn't a waste of time because now they have help. We get a scene of the man in black getting Desmond from his hiding spot and taking him out into the jungle. When Desmond asks where he's taking him, the man in black answers, "To destroy the island." Darn! In the flashbacks, we get the tail end of Across the Sea from Jacob's perspective, where we start with Jacob visiting the man in black when he's living with the Romans, and then Mother take him out to the light where she makes him the protector of the island and tells him that he doesn't have a choice. Then Jacob goes out to get firewood and he returns to find the man in black killed her, so he throws him in the light and he turns into a smoke monster, and then he takes the Mother and the man in black's body and puts them in a cave where Jack, Locke, and Kate will eventually find their bodies centuries later. We then flash forward centuries later, where we see Jacob sitting on a cliffside overlooking young Jeremiah and Ricardo Alpert as they build their group. Man in Black walks up to Jacob and greets him and tells him he's cheating by interfering with them, but Jacob simply says that he only interferes as much as he has to because if he doesn't, the Man in Black will. And the Man in Black mockingly asks if he's afraid he's going to try to use the men to kill him again, and Jacob simply says yes. The Man in Black then begs Jacob to just let him leave the island, but Jacob says no. The Man in Black says that he may not be able to corrupt these men, but one day he'll find someone that he can corrupt and he'll use him to kill Jacob and leave the island for good. We then go a few more centuries later to see Jacob sitting on a hill overseeing the Dharma Initiative coming to the island and building their structures. Richard comes up to Jacob and asks Jacob if he's okay with this, and Jacob says it's not his place to interfere. Richard reminds him that the last time men came to the island, he ordered them to kill them all, but Jacob says that was different as the army men intended to destroy the island with their nuclear weapons, and he couldn't let that happen. Richard then asks what these men intend to do, and Jacob answers they want to study the island. Jacob makes it clear to Richard that they shouldn't kill when they don't have to, that they're not killers, and he wants them to be better than that. But he says they will have to go to these new men and introduce themselves and set boundaries, make it clear the danger that they can pose, and doing so will force them to come up with an agreement that will delve up territory and make clear where they're not allowed to go, so they can't cause any harm to the island. Alpert asks a treaty, and Jacob answers that is what civilized people do. Later, we get a scene with Jacob in his little room under the four-toed statue where Richard comes in and says that he asked to see him. Jacob asks if he remembers what he told him when the Dharma Initiative came to the island, and Richard replies, "You told us not to kill them unless it was absolutely necessary." Jacob nods and says, "I'm afraid now it is absolutely necessary. They've been violating your treaty and going where they shouldn't, and in doing so discovered something that they shouldn't, and they plan to try to exploit it for their own gain, and in doing so would destroy not only the island, but all of humanity everywhere. I'm afraid now is the time to kill them." Richard nods and says there are quick ways they can do it where they'll cause minimal amount of pain and suffering. Jacob gives a faint half smile and says, I'm glad to see how far you've come. And then Richard leaves. And Jacob gives a sincere look of sadness. We then see Jacob walking through some streets in Russia until he knocks on the door of a house, and a woman answers and gives him a hug, saying in Russian that it's so nice to see him again. And then a 4-year-old girl then comes up and hugs him, calling him Papa, and Jacob tells Alana how much he loves her and that he wishes he could see her more often. We then cut to Libby and Hurley sitting on a beach cuddling and watching the sunset, where Hurley says it's getting late and it's time for them to head back. Libby tells Hurley to go on without her and that she'll catch up. Hurley tells her not to be too long and leaves. After he leaves, Jacob comes and sits next to Libby. Libby is surprised to see him, saying after 3 months he hasn't come to visit her yet. Jacob apologizes for that. Libby tells him that Linus and his people have been terrorizing them, and that though that she serves him, they've yet to. That Linus and his people were supposed to serve Jacob to keep interfering with the candidates. Jacob tells her that Richard has lost control of them, that Linus is working for his brother, and there's nothing he can do about it. Jacob then notes that her relationship with Hurley, and Libby apologizes for it, but Jacob tells her not to, saying that it's good for her to find someone special, and it'll be good for him too. And on that note, he leaves. So, we now come to the grand series finale, my final episode of my version of Lost, episode 13, The End, which is a Kate flash forward. So for this episode, instead of getting into the island storyline and then the flash forward, I'm going to describe the episode in order in which it would appear with the flash forwards interwoven into the island storyline. So the episode begins in Kate's house in Los Angeles, where she looks noticeably older. In fact, we see a calendar in the background that gives the date as 2023. Roughly 16 years after the events in the present-day island take place, and 19 years after Flight A-15 first crashed on the island. We see Kate preparing a meal for two, then someone else enters and Kate greets them warmly, and we see she is talking to a 12-year-old girl who enters and Kate calls her Lucy, and she calls Kate Mom. She comes and kisses her on the cheek, and they sit and eat dinner together until they hear a knock on the door. Kate, surprised, answers it, and Ben is standing at the door, and he says, "Hello, Kate." Kate is not happy to see him, and he yells at them, "What the hell is he doing here?" He asks if he can come in, and Kate says no. Lucy notices him and waves hello, and he says, "Hello, Lucy. My name is Benjamin." Kate yells at him not to talk to her, and then yells at him to go, to leave them alone, and her frantic screams echo into the intro, where we get the Lost intro. We then start with a montage to music that shows all the characters on the island and where they are. We see Jack, Kate, Sawyer, Jen, Hurley, Claire, Mr. Echo, Ben, Walt, Faraday, and Charlotte on the boat sailing around the island. We see Lapidus, Richard Albert, Zoe, and the other 316 survivors on Hydra Island working to get the plane ready. We see Miles, Pierre Chang, Rose, Bernard, Steve, Tracy, Shannon, all the 815 survivors back at the barracks, hoping for the best. We see the man in black marching a handcuffed Desmond to the heart of the island. We then go back to the candidates as they get off the boat and head to the island, where Jack, Mr. Echo, Claire, and Walt are looking very determined. Sawyer, Kate, and Jen just looking very angry, and Ben and Hurley and Faraday and Charlotte looking worried as Jack leads them past the old 815 camp. The montage ends, and we get a few character moments where Faraday asks Jack if he knows what he's doing, and Jack says that he does, and Faraday asks how. Jack says that he just knows. Claire reaffirms with Mr. Echo that no matter what happens, the island can't sink, and they're in agreement. Hurley chats with Walt about how weird this all is, but Walt says it's always what needed to happen this way. Kate goes up to Jen and promises him that whatever happens, they will get revenge for Son's death, and Jen just nods in silent approval. And from there, we move into a flash forward with Jen in Korea as a much older businessman, as we see him sitting in the office that used to belong to Son's father, as now Jen is head of Pack Industries. When an 18-year-old girl enters his office, and it is, of course, his daughter, Jian. She says that she's decided to go to college at UCLA in America, and Jen is disappointed, asking her why she doesn't want to go to school here in Korea, and she gives some excuse of UCLA being a better opportunity, but Jen realizes it's because she wants to be closer to them, referring to the Flight 815 survivors, and she admits that that is in fact the case, that they haven't seen them that much in the past years, and she wants to be closer to them. Jen asks her why, but she tries to deflect, which he sees through, and eventually she admits that's the only connection she has to her mother, and sometimes she wishes that she experienced what they did on the island. But Jen tells her that she doesn't, as it was a horrible place where a lot of people were killed, including her mother. But Jian doesn't back down, so Jen agrees, but says that he'll go with her to visit LA to see their old friends, and that makes her happy. We then cut back to the island where Jack's group run into the Man in Black and Desmond, and Kate immediately starts shooting at the Man in Black, which does nothing to him, but Desmond ducks to avoid getting hit. The Man in Black tells her to just save her bullets. Jen asks Walt to kill him, but Walt shakes his head. When Jen asks why, the Man in Black answers, saying that Walt knows he can't kill him and hurting him right now would be pointless. Jen says that it wouldn't be pointless to him. The Man in Black just laughs at that, but Jack tells him that the end is near, and the Man in Black says that his end is near, but the Man in Black says that it isn't, but it's to him and the candidates will die soon. But Jack says that they're not candidates anymore, and the Man in Black realizes that Jack is now the new Jacob and remarks how it was kind of the obvious choice. He then asks Jack if he's here to try to stop him from getting to the heart of the island, but Jack clarifies he's not here to stop him because he wants him to go forward. The Man in Black tells him that he must be a bit confused about what he intends to do, but Jack says he isn't, that the Man in Black thinks he's going to destroy the island, but that's not what's going to happen. What's going to happen is that he's going to kill him. The next flash forward shows Lucy sitting on a couch watching TV while Kate cleans in the background. When the doorbell rings, Kate very wearily opens the door expecting to find Ben, and she's prepared to yell, but instead it's Sawyer, Cassidy, and a 19-year-old girl. The 19-year-old girl runs in when Lucy sees her and runs to her, and Lucy calls out Clementine, and they go and give her a hug. Kate is surprised to see them, but both Sawyer and Cassidy hug. She tells them she didn't expect to see them and asks if they drove all the way from Albuquerque, but Cassidy specifies that they flew. Sawyer adds that they may not have the golden ticket that she does, but they're getting a bit too old for long drives. Kate asks what made them decide to come visit, and Sawyer looks puzzled. I thought you knew we were coming. We're coming to see Claire and Aaron. Kate looks even more confused. Cassidy pines up, says, "You mean you didn't know Claire and Aaron were coming for a visit from Australia?" Sawyer adds that they sent an email. Kate says she didn't get it. She then gets a text and looks worried. A worried look comes across her face when she sees it. "What is it?" Sawyer asks. Kate answers it's from Jen, and he and Jian are coming to visit tomorrow. Huh, Sawyer says, what a coincidence. But Kate starts freaking out, saying, no, it's not a coincidence. Ben was just here last night, and this is his doing. Sawyer and Cassidy look a bit more concerned now, and Sawyer asks what she thinks he wants, and Kate answers, they want our children. We then flash back to the island storyline where we see the group walking with the man in black in the lead, where Kate is taunting him for killing the others and Jen is just silently staring at him, giving him the most evil, hate-filled look. The man in black retorts that if they'd simply let him leave the island, he wouldn't have to kill them all. But Jack answers that he can't let him leave the island because the world would be doomed. But he then asks Jack how he knows that, because Jacob told him, and Jack says no, that he just knows it. They then arrive at the bamboo field, and the man in black says that it's probably best if just he, Jack, and Desmond go forward from here on out. Sawyer starts to protest, but Jack holds them back, saying it's okay, the three of them will continue forward alone. Once they leave, Charlotte asks Walt why he felt he needed to come, so he could just stand by and let Jack do all the work, but Walt shakes his head, saying, trust me, I'll be needed. The island is in grave danger. Claire then pipes in that she has no idea what will happen next, only that the island must be saved, and they have to do everything they can to ensure that the man in black is defeated. We then flash off that to flash forward to see Claire, much older, arriving with the 19-year-old Aaron as they walk in LAX airport, having just flown from Sydney, when suddenly Desmond walks up to Claire and says hello. Claire's surprised to see him and gives him a hug and asks what he's doing here. He says that he's on a business trip, that running Widmore Industries keeps him very busy, and Penny chimes in saying, we're running in Widmore Industries and it keeps us busy, while she gives Claire a hug, and Desmond nods in agreement. Penny then asks Claire if she remembers Charlie, and we see an 18-year-old boy, and Claire says of course, but last time that she saw him, he was much smaller. She then introduces Aaron, and he greets them. Desmond asks what they're doing in LA, and she said they're here to visit with Auntie Kate, that it's been too long, and while they're there, they're going to catch up with Sawyer. Desmond then suggests that he come along as well, as he's sure he can spare time from his business trip. Penny says as long as Kate doesn't mind, but Claire says of course she won't mind. It'll be good to have everyone back together again. We then flash back to the island where we see the man in black, Jack, and Desmond enter the cave with the light. Desmond still has like a Jedi attitude when Jack asks him if he knows what he's going to do, and Desmond says that he assumes he's going somewhere with a really bright light. The man in black and Jack stay at the top of the cliff as Desmond safely scales it, and they hold a safety rope tied to him as he does. They then argue about which one of them will be right. They talk about Locke, and the man in black says that Locke was a sucker, and the only thing he was good for was allowing him to kill Jacob. But Jack argues that he's wrong, that Locke was a man of faith, and his faith will prove him right soon. We then see Desmond go to a pool of water with the light shining in it, with Egyptian writing and hieroglyphs all around, with a plug in the center. He pulls the plug, which causes an electromagnetic event, and the island starts shaking. The man in black smiles and says it looks like that Jack was wrong, and he walks out of the cave. Jack attacks the man in black and smacks him with a rock, which he starts bleeding from, and Jack retorts that it looks like he was wrong too, and the two of them begin fighting. We then go to a flash forward in LAX airport where we see Jian sitting by herself drinking a milkshake when Walt comes up to her looking to be in his 40s. He introduces himself as Walt, as he says he was friends with her parents. When she asks where he knew her from, he answers simply the island. She then asks what the island is like. He says that it's a beautiful place where miracles happen and is very, very much unlike life in the rest of the world. Walt then talks about how his life was pointless until he found meaning on the island. Jian mentions how her father tells her that it's a dangerous place where people die. Walt said that it was a little dangerous when her parents were there, but since then it's been very peaceful, and he suggests that she should visit. But before she can answer, Jen returns and yells at Walt to go get away from his daughter. When he says he's just talking to her, he slams him against the wall and tells him to leave them alone, and so he leaves before Jian can respond. We flash back to the island where we see Kate, Sawyer, Ben, Mr. Echo, Claire, Hurley, Jen, Walt, Faraday, and Charlotte freaking out as the island shakes furiously around them. Hurley guesses that it didn't go so well and trees start falling everywhere. Kate runs off and Sawyer asks where she's going and she says to find Jack. Sawyer starts to chase after her, but a tree falls on Mr. Echo and traps him underneath. So he goes back with the others to work furiously to lift the tree off of him. Hurley asks Walt if he can use his superpowers to get the trees off of Mr. Echo, but Walt says that it doesn't work that way. Faraday looks for another log to use as leverage to pull the tree off of Mr. Echo, but it doesn't work and the log snaps in half. Ben then gets a call on his walkie from Richard, who states the obvious, that the island is coming apart. Ben says that he knows. Then Richard says they nearly have the plane ready to go and they need to get to Hydra Island if they want to be on it, otherwise they're leaving without them. Ben then looks dubious, like he might hightail it and run, but instead he gets in with everyone else and helps push the tree off of Mr. Echo, and Sawyer pulls Mr. Echo out. But he has been severely injured from this fall. Sawyer then yells that they need to get off the island and they start back towards the boat. But Faraday says it's too far, they'll never make it. Sawyer asks if he has a better idea, and Ben speaks up that the man in black has a boat that's much closer. We then go to the barracks where they watch the island fall apart around them. Miles yells that they need to leave, but Rose says no, they should just stay there and everything will sort itself out. Miles thinks that's crazy, but Pierre Chang agrees with her, saying by the time they found the way off the island, it would be too late. But Bernard grabs Rose's hand, backing her up and saying that it won't be necessary, that they'll all be fine, and everyone else there agrees with that. We then see the man in black approaching a cliff where his boat is at the bottom of it, but Jack approaches and yells at him to stop. The man in black then turns around to confront him, and the two of them charge at each other and engage in an epic fight while the island crumbles around them. Eventually, the man in black gets the better of Jack and prepares to stab him in the throat and tells Jack that he wants him to know that he died for nothing, and he manages to draw blood. But then Kate shows up and shoots him. He looks up shocked, and Kate tells him that she saved some bullets for him, and then shoots him again, and he falls off the cliff to his death. Kate then runs to Jack, who's bleeding, but he says that he's okay. Soon the rest of the team show up with Sawyer and Faraday carrying Mr. Echo. Kate tells them that they killed the man in black and that it's over, but the island continues to fall apart all around them, and Hurley says that it doesn't feel like it's over. Ben then brings up that Lapidus and the others are waiting for them on Hydra Island to leave, and they'll leave without them unless they get there soon. So Sawyer and Kate look down at the boat and say that they should get going, but Jack says that he's not going anywhere, that he needs to stay and fix this, and he owes it to the island. Kate says that he doesn't owe it anything, but Jack reminds her of all the people still in the barracks, and also that the island is special and it needs to survive. So she starts crying, saying that she doesn't want him to stay behind, but Jack says that's what needs to happen. So Kate kisses him long and deep, and then turns to Sawyer and tells them that they better go. Hurley says that there's no way he's jumping down that and that he's staying with Jack, and Ben says that he's lived on the island for so long that if the island's going down, and he's going down with it. Mr. Echo speaks up, saying that he's staying too, that he's devoted to the island. Faraday and Charlotte look at each other, and with the look they decide that they're staying too. Walt simply says that he belongs there, and Claire says that she's staying too, but Kate goes up to her and tells her not to, that she needs to return to Aaron. Claire argues that she doesn't know how to be a mother anymore, and that Aaron would be better off without her, but Kate yells at her no, that Aaron needs her. Jack says that he is now the protector of the island, and he releases her from the island service and tells her to go. So reluctantly she does, so Kate, Sawyer, Claire, and Jen go to leave, while Jack, helped by Hurley, Ben, Walt, and Mr. Echo, carried by Faraday and Charlotte, make their way back to the cave. We then get a flash forward to someone knocking on Kate's door. She answers it to see Claire, and she gives her a hug, telling her how good it is to see her again. With Claire is Aaron, Desmond, Penny, and Charlie, who enter. We then cut to seeing Kate, Claire, Sawyer, Cassidy, Desmond, Penny, and Jen sitting on lounge chairs on the outside porch talking, while Lucy, Clementine, Gian, Aaron, and Charlie are inside playing video games and talking. Sawyer mentions that the last time they were all together like this was 4 years ago at Lapidus' funeral. Kate says that how great it is to see them all again, but that they weren't brought there by accident. Desmond tries to dispute this, saying that he just randomly decided to stop by because he saw Claire at the airport, and it's all just a coincidence. But Kate argues that with the experience that they had on the island, they should know better than to believe in coincidence. Penny looks confused, and Sawyer explains how Jacob engineered for all of them to come to the island. And Kate says that she fears that he is trying to do the same thing now with their kids. Jen backs this up by telling them about Jian's encounter with Walt at the airport. They talk about who's in charge of the island now and never mention him by name, but it's implied that Jack is in charge, and when they talk about someone who died, it's implied that it was Hurley who died. Claire then speaks up and asks if their kids are going. Would it really be so bad? And Kate looks at her like she's crazy. Claire reminds her that she never wanted to leave the island in the first place, that it was Kate that convinced her, and Kate says that it was so she could raise Aaron, and Claire says that she's thankful for that, but she has raised Aaron, and he's a young man now, and that he's been experiencing strange dreams and illustrating some strange abilities similar to Walt's. And that Walt was only happy once he returned to the island, so maybe that's what he needs in order to be happy. The others seem conflicted about having similar experiences with their kids, but Jen strongly says no, that his daughter belongs with him. We then flash back to the island where we see Kate, Claire, Sawyer, and Jen approach the cliff, and Claire clarifies that's the quickest way. Jen then jumps, as Sawyer, surprised at how quickly he jumps in after him after he sees it's okay. Kate then urges Claire to go next. She says she's not sure she can do it, but Kate reassures her that she can, so she jumps, and then Kate jumps after her. We then see Jack, Hurley, Walt, Ben, Faraday, Charlotte, and Mr. Echo arrive at the cave. Jack explains that the light went out, and as its protector, he needs to go and turn it back on. The ground begins to shake more, and they notice how quickly the island is coming apart. Charlotte is in doubt and notes that she doesn't think they'll make it in time. So then we see Walt close his eyes and reach out with his hand, and the energy seems to be emanating from him, and a dim light starts to emit from the cave where there was none before. Ben asks what he's doing, and Faraday answers that he's slowing it down. Through gritted teeth, Walt tells them to hurry. Jack then tells to Hurley and tells him that he has to be the protector of the island. When Hurley asks Jack that he's coming back, right? Jack doesn't answer, and Hurley starts crying and says no, that it's supposed to be him. And Jack says it's only supposed to be him so he can do this, that Hurley has to take over for him now. Hurley reluctantly agrees, and Jack asks if anyone has anything to drink out of, and Charlotte pulls a drink bottle from her backpack and tosses it to Jack. He scoops up some water and hands it to Hurley and tells him to drink. After he does, Jack tells him that you're like me now. More ground shaking happens, and Ben suggests perhaps they should get a move on. Mr. Echo mourns like he's losing consciousness, and Ben goes to him and tells the others to go, that he'll stay with Mr. Echo and Walt to look after them. So Jack, Hurley, Faraday, and Charlotte go into the cave, and they tie a rope around Jack and lower him down as he's a bit too injured to scale the cliff face on his own. After he's down, Charlotte says that she can't wait up there, and she starts scaling down the cliffs on her own without a rope. Faraday calls after her, but she doesn't answer, so Faraday tells Hurley he's going after her and tells him to wait here, and Hurley answers, "Are you kidding me? I'm not climbing down that." So Faraday claps him on the back and then tells him he'll be right back, and he starts climbing down. We then cut to Lapidus, Richard, Zoe, and the 316 survivors getting on the plane and getting it as it's almost ready to go, as the 316ers are all freaked out at the island falling apart around them until Richard gets a call on the walkie. We then see Kate, Jen, Claire, Kate, Jen, Claire, and Sawyer on the boat, where Sawyer tells them to wait for them as they're on their way. Richard asks how far away are they, and Sawyer says, "I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. Lapidus grabs the walkie from Richard and tells Sawyer to haul ass because they'll be ready to go in 10 minutes, and they're getting off the ground while there's still ground to get off of. He then tosses the walkie aside, leaving Sawyer to yell until he says, "Damn it." We then see all the 815ers back at the barracks sitting outside in a circle holding hands with their eyes closed in a sort of silent prayer as the island continues to fall apart around them. We then flash forward to Aaron at Kate's house sitting by himself reading while Clementine and Lucy cheerfully play video games, and Gian and Charlie can be heard interacting with them in the next room. Suddenly, Walt comes up to Aaron and says hello. Aaron asks how he got in, and he says he's an old friend of his mother's. Aaron instantly says, "You're from the island," which wasn't a question, but Walt says yes anyway. Aaron asks if he knows why he feels so strange and out of place, and Walt answers it's because he belongs on the island. He then tells him about his own experience, about how he felt incomplete and odd while he was living in New York, and it wasn't until he returned to the island again that he felt whole. Kate comes in and starts yelling at Walt, asking him how the hell he got in here. Walt calmly tells Kate that she's not doing her daughter or any of them any favors by keeping them from their destiny, and that the island is where they belong. He then speaks to all the adults there and tells them that in their hearts they know this to be true, and you can tell he struck a chord with them. Jen speaks up and says that the island is a place of death. Why would they want their kids to go there? But Walt says that it's different now, that the island has been a safe, peaceful place for over 15 years. Ben then comes in out of nowhere and says, besides of which, even though you all faced hardship, you found peace while you were there. It affected your lives for the better, and you all became better people because of this, as it brought you all together. The years you spent on the island were the most important years of your lives. And then Walt asked them if any of them would deny this, and we see the look on their faces one by one to see that they know what Ben says is true. Then Gian walks in and says that it's her choice, that they're old enough to make it, and she for one wants to see the island. Lucy comes up and hugs Kate and agrees that she wants to see the island. Charlie tells them that they don't have to stay forever, but they all at least want to visit. And Aaron adds, but if they do want to stay, it should be their choice. And the adults all reluctantly agree. We then flash back to Jack at the bottom of the cave, who sees Desmond lying face down in the pool. Jack drags him away and puts him face up. He then unties the rope from himself and ties it around Desmond. By this time, Charlotte and Faraday have come down, and Jack tells them Desmond needs to be brought up safely, so he tugs on the rope and Hurley begins to lift him up. Charlotte immediately goes to reading the Egyptian writing. She tells them that this is a very ancient place that was built by a civilization that she read about a very, very long time ago to protect what they perceived as the heart of the universe. Jack asks her if it says how to fix this. She points to the plug and tells him to put that back. Jack nods, but then Faraday gets in his way and urgently tells Jack that Desmond was able to survive that much electromagnetism because he's special. It will surely kill Jack. But Jack says that Desmond is in no condition to go back in there and it needs to be done. Faraday takes his hand off of Jack and offers it to him to shake, and Jack takes it. It was good to know you. It was good to know you, Jack, he says. Jack replies the same and turns to Charlotte, who gives a mock salute. He tells them both that they better go and to take care of the island. So they begin scaling up the cliff, and Jack gets into the pool and puts the plug back in. But in doing so, he is blasted by a massive amount of electromagnetic energy, and it pushes him through the pool out into a stream that leads into a river. We then see Lapidus and the others on the plane as they start up and prepare to leave when Richard, who's standing at the door, sees Sawyer, Kate, Claire, and Jen running towards them, and he tells Lapidus to wait. He yells at Richard to help them aboard, so he does help them up, and they strap in, and Lapidus begins to take off, which is successful, and the plane flies off. We then flash forward to see Walt driving a van with Kate, Lucy, Sawyer, Clementine, Cassidy, Claire, and Aaron, as Ben drives a van with Jen, Gian, Desmond, Penny, and Charlie. They arrive at a port to a boat, to board a boat. An older Hemi steps off the boat and greets them warmly and tells them to get on board, and that the next stop is the island. We then flash back to the island where we see Miles and Chang and all the other 815ers just sitting in a circle. They all open their eyes and look around them in relief as the shaking has stopped and the island is okay again. Rose says, "See, I told you we'd be fine." Then we go to just outside the cave where Faraday and Charlotte help Hurley carry Desmond outside, where Walt is waiting for them with his eyes open and tells them that Jack did it. Hurley asks if he's coming back, and Walt sadly shakes his head. Hurley starts crying, but Ben reminds him that he's in charge now, that it's up to him to protect the island. Hurley looks at Desmond and asks what they should do with Desmond, and Daniel Faraday suggests they just let him return back to his family. But then Hurley asks that Jacob never really let people leave the island, but Ben interjects that was Jacob's way. You're in charge now, and you can do whatever you want, and so maybe there's a better way. Hurley then tells Ben that Ben has a lot of experience on the island and asks if he can help him, and Ben says it would be his honor. We then flash forward to the boat arriving at the pier that's near the old 815 camp that's now all developed into a fully fledged town. While not being completely modern, it isn't entirely primitive either, as its houses look somewhat modern but a bit more rustic than the suburban neighborhood of Dharmaville. And they all have things like electricity and stuff like that. It isn't completely modern in its technology. The kids walk off the boat first, and Hurley welcomes them to the island and says they've been waiting a long time for them. Claire then runs up to Hurley and hugs him. Sawyer and Desmond and Penny shake his hand. Kate and Jen walk up to him a bit trepidatiously, and he tells them not to worry, dudes. Whatever happens here will be their choice. Kate cracks a smile and says okay, then gives him an unexpected bear hug and tells him how great it is to see him again. Hurley tells them to come to the village, that they have something special planned for tonight. They then enter the village where they're reunited with Rose and Bernard as they stand with their adult children and their grandchildren, as apparently during the 16 years they were brought to the island. We likewise see Steve and Tracy with 3 kids in their teens that they had together, as well as Tracy's 3 children from her previous marriage that are in their 20s. We see Faraday and Charlotte together with 2 kids, about 10 12 years old. We see Miles with one of the 815 extras, let's say Esmeralda, and they have a 2-year-old girl together, and they're also standing with the girl's grandfather, Pierre Chang. We see Mr. Echo and Shannon with their 2 kids, and we see Richard Alpert has, during the missing 16 years, he had somehow returned to the island, and he now has a full head of gray hair, indicating that after Jacob died, he started aging again. We also see Cindy with the 2 kids from the tail sections, Zach and Emma, who are now in their 20s, as well as a full village full of over 200 people. Kate and the new arrivals all greet them warmly. Later at night, they're all gathered around a large fire as Hurley gives a speech. He tells them that everyone knows that he has the ability to talk to the dead, but with Walt's help, they've been planning for something special, which is now possible with Aaron arriving, and they have something really special planned, that for one night only, all their loved ones who passed on the island will appear to everyone just for tonight. Kate looks skeptical, but Hurley, Walt, and Aaron start humming, and lights emanate from their bodies, and then there's a flash. And then when the flash dissipates, a lot of people who died are suddenly there. Jack, Michael, Charlie, Boone, Ana Lucia, Libby, Alex, Locke, Rousseau, Sun, Saeed, Frogurt, Arts, Juliet, Alana, and a few others. They all go to greet them. Hurley hugs Libby and Claire, and Charlie reunite, and she introduces Charlie to Aaron. Sun and Jin hug, and he introduces Sun to Jean. Juliet hugs Sawyer and then meets Cassidy and Clementine. Locke hugs Hurley and tells him thank you, that he's done a great job. Walt reunites with his father. Shannon and Boone reunite. Ben hugs Alex and tells her that he's so sorry, but she reassures him that it's not his fault and that she's proud of what he's become. Desmond and Penny introduce their son Charlie to his namesake, who is honored by this, and Ana Lucia and Saeed shake hands with Mr. Echo, Rose, and the others. We then see Jack approach Kate, who's crying with tears in her eyes, and gives him a long, deep hug. She introduces her daughter Lucy to Jack, who's very happy to see her. Kate then asks Lucy to give them a moment, and Jack asks where Lucy's father is, and Kate answers that he's standing right in front of me. Jack is very confused as he says that she's too young to be his. Kate asks him if he remembers the time he had some sperm frozen. Jack says that he does, but he never told her about it. Kate smiles and says that she found out anyway. She then cries again and tells him that she's missed him so much, and hugs and kisses him. And Jack tells her that their daughter is beautiful. We flash back to 2007 island storyline, where we see Jack wash up on shore of the river as he's weak and dying, and he slowly walks through the bamboo field. We intercut between scenes of Jack walking through the bamboo field and all the old 815 survivors reminiscing with all of those who passed away, until Jack collapses in the spot where he woke up, and Vincent runs up to him and lays with him, and as he sees the plane take off, we then get a close-up on his eye as he closes it. The end. So, that is it. That is finally my version of how I would write Lost. Now, speaking of season 6 in particular, I know some people may have some issues with the changes I make, particularly how most of the flashbacks throughout the season focus on some of the more obscure or lesser known characters, so it could be the complaint that we're pushing the main characters aside. But I would make the argument that all the main characters have been thoroughly explored to this point, so to have centric episodes for them would be kind of repetitive, which I believe it was in the actual show. I believe seeing the Flash sideways was just repeating the same beats over and over again and giving us no new information. And the Flash sideways were completely unnecessary and didn't do anything to contribute to these characters. So I think exploring some of the more important but lesser known characters like Widmore, Walt, Jacob, Man in Black, and Richard Alpert, that's more important to fleshing out the whole mythology of the story and the story in general. And also I would argue that I explored the main characters through the main island storyline, and as we got more closer to the end, started sort of weaning out some of the lesser characters, either by killing them off or by having them sort of sit it out where they weren't really important to the story. So the last several episodes focused more on the main characters, Jack, Kate, and all them. And then, of course, the ending episode, the final episode, was, of course, entirely focused. We had a flash forward that was focused entirely on on the main characters. And I also opened the season with a Jack-centric episode, and that being because, of course, Jack didn't get that much into play in this finale because, of course, he was dead in the future. But that's why I had opened the season with his own centric episode, so it kind of bookends focusing on the main characters. Now, as for the format of the final episode, you might be thinking that it's kind of anticlimactic, and it kind of takes the suspense out of it, knowing that Kate, Sawyer, Desmond, Jen survive, and Claire, and then they leave the island. They're there in the future. And also, I'm intercutting between scenes where Walt and Ben reference that the island is still there, whereas in the present time, the island's falling apart. So it makes it clear that the island will survive, that Jack and the others will be victorious. But does anyone really think that the island would actually collapse? I don't think that was ever a true case. So it's obvious that Jack and all of them are going to be successful. So I don't think it ruins or spoils anything to reveal this early on. I think it's more important to explore the main characters and what happens. And this is something I thought the show didn't do, is because it ends without showing us what happened to Hurley after he took over the island, or what happened to Kate and Sawyer when they returned to the mainland. We're just meant to guess these things, but I actually think seeing the conclusion, and also tying in the storyline to their children, to the next generation, and tying it into what happens to the island next, is a hell of a lot more interesting and important, and fleshes out the characters more, and is more important to the character stories than these pointless afterlife flash sideways BS. Also, I did try to honor what the finale did by bringing about the characters and having them reunite with those who passed, but do it in a way that I felt was more meaningful than having some afterlife where they all meet. So it's kind of a fake afterlife and they move on, which is very abstract, and how this afterlife gets created and what sense does it make. It's more tangible in my version, where there's actually the real people who survived when they're older and with their children, and they just get to reunite for one night with those who passed away. So it serves the same purpose of having that heartfelt reunion, and also stresses what the ending of the original series stressed about the island being the most important thing to ever happen to them, and that the people they met on the island were the most important people in their lives. But I think my version does a better job of expressing that. So rather than them just meeting in the afterlife, where they just meet the people on the island and not any of their kids, and only certain people on the island are allowed to be there, which all doesn't make any sense. This version makes a lot more sense, and the family is there, and everyone who is important to them is there. So I actually think it's a much better way to do that. And I think the cost of having some of the sting taken out, that the island's going to survive and certain people are going to leave the island, I think it's worth it in order to have that huge payoff. And I think it's a much better way to have that emotional blow. Now, you might think it's a bit silly to have like Hurley glowing or whatever and bringing people back from the dead, but I would argue that it's very, very much less sillier than what the show actually did by having a fake afterlife and then meeting in the church. I think this is a much better version. Just me personally. That's it. But anyway, that is all I gotta say. I gotta thank you guys so much for watching. If you've watched my entire series of how I would write Lost, my complete fan fiction of what I would do. It did take me a lot longer to do season 6. It took me over a month just to write this one video, so I've been behind my other videos because of that. But I wanted to make sure I completed this and got this done. Season 6 did acquire my attention a lot more, since I'm basically was rewriting it from scratch, which frankly I think is what needed to be done in order for the show to be good. But you will notice I did keep some parts, particularly the finale. A lot of the island storyline stayed pretty much the same. I just incorporated the characters. And the other thing I would note, though, is that the original show tried to stress how important the island is, but didn't really make sense, because the island was like a horrible place where people died and it was just a place of death, whereas in my version a lot less people died, and so it wasn't really a place of death, so you could say there was a place where a miracle happens. Plus, like, I had so many people survive, build their own village, build up the 815 village and make it like an actual town, which I think is a lot more honoring what all the characters went through, rather than just everyone dying and leaving, and only Hurley and Ben being there, which I don't think really honors what people do. Now, it does leave me with the problem that I had way too many characters to deal with, and sometimes they could get a bit cumbersome, and some of the characters, like Desmond, for example, got a bit underplayed. But I think that's a price worth paying for that. And as I said, many of the characters that weren't very important, like Steve, Tracy, or whatever, I would just have them aside, or even Lapidus, like have them off at the barracks or at the plane where that doesn't really matter, and focus on the main story with the candidates, which I think is a much better compromise than to just kill them off, especially if your whole point is saying how beautiful a place the island is, and then having it be a place of death where people just drop dynamite on themselves and get killed because the island's done with them, doesn't make the island a really nice place, does it? And it does in my version. Also, in my version, if you notice from this part and the first part of season 6 and a bit of season 5, I pretty much answered a lot of these questions that went completely unanswered. Now, of course, this is just my fan fiction. It's not an official version, but I tried to, in my version, completely answered, and so I think this would be much more satisfying for a mythology sense, for all the important questions, like what to deal with the numbers. I didn't go very deep in that. I just mentioned something about them being Jacob's numbers, but at least it addresses that, where the show pretty much just ignored it or tried to say that, oh, the numbers didn't really mean anything, which is BS. They obviously did. Answer stuff about Claire Psychic, about Widmore, about what happened to Walt with his powers, what's the deal with him, and yeah, several other things that I can't remember, like the bird, a lot of other things I went into detail. I didn't, and some things I just left out of my version entirely that the show left unanswered. I just never asked the questions, such as the magical box. I got rid of that, and Ben Widmore having rules, or the Hurley bird, whatever, just got rid of those things. So the things I did keep in, I pretty much answered. I might have missed a few things, but all the important things I did answer, whereas the show left way too many unanswered, and at the same time tied it into a very emotional ending that focused on the characters, which I'm not saying my version perfect, because as I said, I am not a professional writer. I know I make some logistical mistakes here and there, but this is along the lines of what the show should have done. Should have had something that tied everything up in a nice bow, but at the same time a very emotionally satisfying story for our characters. I honestly believe that this version satisfies character stories better than these pointless flash sideways, but that's just me. Anyway, that is it for my How I Would Write Lost series. Thank you guys so much for watching. I got 2 more videos coming before I finally conclude my coverage of Lost, my top 30 best favorite episodes of Lost, and my top 15 least favorite worst episodes of Lost. So be sure, keep an eye out for that. Check out my channel as I cover many other shows like The Expanse, Mr. Robot, Star Trek, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all that. And thanks a lot for watching.